Hello, it's David Lawrence from Grant McGregor. Today, myself and Doug are going to talk about Azure. More importantly, we feel that and understand that when organizations have been using Azure for some time, they come across some common pitfalls, such as trying to get the best value out of Azure, trying to understand the complexity of the invoicing and pricing. Hello, Doug.
I do.
How are you?
At the same time as each other. Yeah, good, thanks.
We were talking earlier about some of the challenges that organizations have around Azure, especially once they've adopted it. And in particularly that we find that organizations have adopted Azure and have no partner. So they've onboarded it, they get an invoice typically from Microsoft, and they're trying to find their way through that. I mean, what do you think some of the typical pain points are that they're finding?
Well, I think one of the biggest pain points with Azure is growth and keeping track of what's in your Azure and understanding what it does. So it's quite common for Azure to grow and add more and more resources all the time, and not keep track of what all of these things are for and how they're connected and what they do. So that's one area that people can find challenging. The other being cost management.
Right.
So the invoicing that you get through from Microsoft or some other providers is not always the clearest. It's quite complex. So that can be challenging for people to navigate.
And I think there's a couple of points to just pick up. I mean, you're saying it kind of grows arms and legs.
Yeah.
So, the original scope of Azure was to say put that storage in or that virtual server in, and then suddenly before they know it, somebody's come up with the good idea of extending to another server or another storage point.
Yeah.
And I suppose because it's virtual as well, you can't touch it or feel it.
Yeah, you can add more and more to Azure all the time, but the thing to keep in mind that isn't most of these things have a cost associated with them. So, when you provision something in Azure, quite often it will get you to provision other things alongside it.
Right.
So you might create a server and it will say, well, I also need to create a virtual network and an IP address and all these sorts of things. And all of these things have micro costs associated. So if you do that a few hundred times, you end up with a lot of infrastructure and you start thinking, I don't remember creating that. And what's that associated with and things. So yeah, keeping track of that is challenging and also something that we can help with.
So on the surface, I just want to create another server, and before you know, you create another network, another pool resource, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we, with our experience as a partner, can add that value and expertise because we've seen those pitfalls before
Yeah.
and actually know how to unwind that or communicate that to the customer.
And creating things in the right order with a good naming convention, tags, and documentation really helps with that sort of thing. So anything that is being created in Azure, you should document that somewhere in an asset management system, a configuration management system, and use a naming convention that means something to you. So the name of the organization, what it is, a server, a storage account, maybe a number or something afterwards. And Azure has a tagging system built into it as well. So you can create tags and associate those with resources. So when you're filtering things out, you could look at a tag and say, well, all these resources are associated with this server because I've tagged them to that server. And there might be, 100 of them.
That's interesting. So that's some good advice to allow us very quickly to uh, demonstrate what savings that customer could make. A common story we hear from organizations that we help with Azure, number one priority, either not necessarily from the IT person, but definitely from the financial manager or director, is that the Azure invoices just suddenly start from there and just grow arms and legs. And actually, they're not easy to understand, right, are they? I mean, how can we help organizations to sort of decipher that whole mist?
When we provide an invoice for Azure, we typically bundle the resources together using the tags. So, for example, a server with all of its associated resources, disks and IPs and all that sort of thing, they would be bundled together and we would say this server and all of its backup and disks and things has this cost associated with it, rather than what would be presented from a Microsoft report, which is 10,000 lines of individual things by hour, which really means nothing to anybody. So bundling the resources together makes it a lot easier to understand.
So we're, if I understand you correctly, we're consolidating,
Yeah.
a 100 line items into, two or three simple bullet points that somebody can understand what they're being charged for and why.
Yeah. So when somebody's looking at an invoice and they're saying, well, how much is my file server costing me? That would take into account of how long the file server's been running, its IP, its disks, its backup and things. But as a bundled item, that would be, well, this file server costs however much.
We've talked about organizations using Azure for some time, typically 3 to 12 months before they start to have some of these challenges. I think some of the biggest challenges that they have is cost savings or those opportunity to save money. Typically, they're started off buying it direct from Microsoft, basically the full RRP.
Yeah.
They've added stuff, as we've said, and then before they know it, there's a significant cost from when they first started. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we can provide cost savings?
Yeah, we can provide cost savings in a number of different ways. So, to begin with, purchasing Azure through ourselves, there's a cost saving just in doing that.
All right, okay.
So purchasing direct from Microsoft, as you say, is at the RRP. Purchasing it through ourselves is at a lower price point than that.
Yeah.
So even if all you did was move your infrastructure to us, and we take on your subscription, it would immediately be a lower cost than it would be directly with Microsoft. On top of that, we would look to assist you in cost saving. Maybe there are servers which don't need to run 24 hours a day and can be switched off at night to save costs. Maybe you've got resources that are over provisioned. Does every disk on every server need to be a premium disk, or could it be a standard disk which costs less? And then looking at projects and migrations to say, well, do you need a file server, or would a storage account be more cost effective? So there's the direct cost saving of moving to us, and then there's the assistance that we can offer as well to help reduce costs.
That's interesting. A couple points that I picked up there was, just by moving that subscription to us as a cloud service provider for Microsoft, they're going to save money.
Yeah.
But also our experience and the assessment that we have for that customer, highlighting the necessity that they just want the server in this instance to be up and performing well. That doesn't necessarily mean they need premium disks. Doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be up and running 24/7. And that also some of the other advantages that you said. So, some great cost saving advice that we can give if we have that opportunity.
Yeah, for sure.
We've talked a little bit about how we could help save uh, organizations money with their Azure, and we've talked a little bit about typically what we find is an organization would have set up Azure for themselves, and then they're on this journey. Knowledge is king here. So our first point would be, have you actually configured it correctly in the first place? Is that right?
Yeah, which is it's not unique to Azure. It's the same with on-premise infrastructure. Servers can often be over or under provisioned for
Right.
the task at hand. Over provisioned servers in Azure cost more. So definitely assessing what's in place and looking at the application requirements. Does a server need to be 8 cores with 32 gig, or is 4 cores with 16 gig going to be acceptable? In which case, there's an immediate cost saving to be had there. That's a fairly obvious cost saving. There are some less obvious ones, some more hidden ones, such as tiering of disk performance in the servers. And then you could look at, as I mentioned a minute ago, is a server actually required for this job? So everyone thinks, well, I need a file server because I've got to put my files somewhere. But with Azure, it offers services instead of servers. So you could use a storage account, which is basically files as a service, and then you're not paying for the overhead of processor and RAM and license and things. You're literally just paying for file storage, which is, again, a cost saving.
And that's interesting, and that isn't unusual for us to be in that position. It's the availability of Azure versus the performance of Azure versus the cost management of what it costs, and balancing those three pillars are really important, right? So that the end user, the customer, wants to make sure that it's performing well, number one, and number two, that the performance when they are using it, it's adequate, it's being productive for their people, and number three, that it's costing what it should just cost.
Yeah. You don't want to under provision the servers and give the users a bad experience.
Yeah.
But running servers at times of the day when people aren't using them, or are having wasted resources, you don't need to do that, so you can save money.
And we have experience in that again with those assessments and that relationship we have with our Azure customers to point some of these out.
Yep.
We've talked about helping and assisting organizations with Azure. We often find that these organizations are on a pay-as-you-go kind of licensing model direct with Microsoft. What are the best strategies to ensure that Azure services are running effectively and when needed?
Like most servers out the box, an Azure server will run 24/7, so it's just on all the time. But the advantage that you have over traditional infrastructure is that the servers can be shut down to save money.
Okay, right.
And that doesn't just mean shutting down the operating system, that means actually stopping the back end resources. And the reason that saves money is because then Microsoft are free to allocate those resources to other customers. That doesn't detract from your infrastructure. They're ready for you to reallocate to you as soon as you need them. But from a Microsoft perspective, it's better to have free resources to give to someone else than have it allocated to a server that's doing nothing. So using Azure Logic Apps, you can start and stop servers on a schedule, which, when they're turned off, they don't cost anything.
And that reminds me of you're maybe a little bit too young to remember this, but in the olden days that people would put their washing machines on during the night, or dishwashers, because it would save them money, not at peak times. So I guess that's very similar.
Yeah, definitely.
If we find organizations have decided to make that jump into the Azure world, some of them have gone through that over the following months and they're finding it fine. But we do find more often than not that organizations have made that jump and are just overwhelmed by it, either by the costing model or the technical stuff that goes on in running an Azure day to day. What do you think, or with your experience with organizations, how we can add value in that case?
Yeah, so a managed service provider such as ourselves can help initially with assessing the infrastructure, and making recommendations, as we've discussed, for cost saving and projects to better use the resources. We can also help with things like monitoring and patching and alerting, backup management, all these sorts of day-to-day tasks that people don't necessarily have time to do. We have a dedicated team that manages servers, sits there and monitors these sorts of things. So servers that go offline, disks that get full, those things are picked up straight away and actioned. Likewise, backups that fail, they can be rerun or diagnosed as to what the problem is. So a managed service provider, does all these things, but they also offer someone to talk to. So talking to Microsoft support directly, while they're experts in their field and they do a fantastic job, you do have to go through their sort of escalation process really before you get to talk to an engineer who really knows much about Azure. We're based in the UK, and if you call us, you'll be straight through to a technician and someone that you can talk to about Azure and get some help immediately.
And that's interesting. It sounds awfully like that old-fashioned approach about having that relationship and that trust to know that that IT manager or IT person in an organization that's running Azure that might have some experience. Number one, they're time poor, so they're doing lots of other things. And number two, they're still accountable for the management and uptime of those Azure servers. So what you're saying is that outsourcing that element of the uh, uptime, the management, and the security and the patching, as you said, of the Azure services, that IT person, IT manager can get on and do other things, knowing that all the time and all the while that the Azure servers are providing the tools for the users to do their job.
Yeah, it gives them peace of mind that these sorts of things are being monitored and managed correctly, and frees up their time to do things that I'm sure they'd rather be doing than sitting and watching monitoring alerts from servers. And someone to talk to if something goes wrong, or they need assistance or advice, then someone they can easily pick up the phone to and just ask some questions.
And how often are we in that world? As obviously when we're IT people and technical people, but we like to pick up the phones to professional service organizations to get their advice to see how we can do things differently and better.
Yeah, definitely. When we're dealing with third parties or support companies for our services, it's much better to work with a partner that you can talk to easily. You can pick up the phone to and get technical information on, rather than having to go through layers of level one to level two to level three before you get to talk to someone that might be able to answer the question.
And yeah, imagine how frustrating that's going to be for the IT manager, IT person in that organization waiting on a Microsoft telephone line, bless them, maybe 7 or 10 hours later. And I think that's one of the key differentiators. If you partner with us, we can 9 out of 10 times answer that problem, that question. But we also, with that 1%, can also have direct access to the channel and direct to Microsoft. So that's just going to speed up that problem solving, remove that anxiety, and critically make sure that the Azure services are up as much as they need to be.
Yeah, I think that's an important point there as well. Is that not only can we provide support on these things, but we have a direct link into higher tier Microsoft support and support from other Azure licensing providers. So we can draw on their expertise more directly than a sort of pay as you go customer might be able to.
We've talked about organizations that have taken those first steps into the Azure world and finding it uh, overwhelming, but also we've talked a little bit about those organizations overutilizing Azure and how we can help them. But the flip side of that conversation is actually organizations that have taken those baby steps into Azure are actually underutilizing Azure, not maybe seeing the complete value of that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Is that something we find often?
Um, Customers underutilizing Azure is fairly common. There's over 200 different services in Azure that you could potentially use, and trying to understand what all of them do would take a very long time. So that's where people like ourselves can assist with that. Um, some examples of the sort of thing that we see maybe underutilization is if you're running a virtual desktop infrastructure. That's a good way of giving your end users access to applications that are running in Azure. But out the box, the virtual desktop, Azure Virtual Desktop as it's called, is effectively just a Windows machine that you can remote to, which is fine. But when you try and scale that up to 50 people, 100 people, 500 people, whatever, there is an additional configuration you can do to give your end users a smoother experience. So there's a bit of technology called FS Logics. And what that does is provide a unified profile experience across all of your virtual desktop machines. So you may have 10 or 20 virtual desktop machines, and if they log onto one, it shouldn't matter. They should get the same experience as logging onto another. The user shouldn't be aware of which virtual machine they're connecting to. And FS Logics is something which facilitates that, but is often overlooked. So then end users end up complaining and saying, well, I'm connected to this machine, it's different to that machine. They shouldn't need to worry about that. That's not a problem that should be on the end users to worry about.
And I think that's some really good examples because some organizations that have made that journey into Azure and seeing the real value of enabling effective remote working or for hybrid workers, uh, using virtual desktops, as I would have referred to them, but actually saying this is really cool, and actually it's allowing real time productivity gains. How do we take that to the next level? What device do I need? And you're talking about FS Logic, just making sure that when those multiple virtual desktops are available, that access is streamlined to those individuals. So they're not logging onto one machine and finding a different experience. They just want to do their job,
Yeah.
and making sure that the performance and uptime reflect that. I also think it's a bit like when you get a new motor car in this day and age, and it's like a little mini computer in that car, and we're geeky, right? But you kind of we would spend hours trying to figure out all the menu structures and the best little configurations, uh, because we can. But there's a lot of people that can because they just are not that technical, or they don't have that time. And I think again that's where our advice in that Azure space, just to say, yeah, you're not using that motor car to its full potential. There's an equal button there,
Yeah.
or there's a cruise control button or adaptive cruise. And we're just highlighting some of these features and getting the best experience for them.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be everything in Azure. There are some quick wins generally in most Azure infrastructures, whether that be something simple like just shutting the servers down or implementing new systems like FS Logics. If you're using application servers or web servers, there are wins to be had from high availability and replication of servers to give you better resilience and redundancy. So there's almost always something you can do to either make it better or make it cost less or perform better.
We've talked there a little bit about remote access, virtual desktops, and we talked about cost savings, productivity gains with Azure, optimization, getting the best out of Azure. We haven't explored business continuity, disaster recovery, uh, which is obviously a key part of any uptime of a system. How can we help those organizations in that case?
Business continuity and disaster recovery are similar to each other, but they're not identical. So
Mhm.
traditionally, you would have backups of a server, and they would run on a schedule. Once a day, once every 4 hours, once an hour, something like that, and that would give you the ability to restore that server if there was a problem. So if there was some reason you need to restore that server. But Azure goes a step further and offers business continuity in that you can have a server which is constantly replicating to another server. So if this first server goes down, the second one takes over, and you don't really notice the difference. Likewise, it's scalable, flexible. So if you do have a web app server that maybe runs off of one or two machines, and you need that to scale up and run off more machines, it's quite easy to spin up additional servers and give you that not only performance increase by having multiple servers, but also the redundancy in case one of those servers fails. So backup is definitely something that Azure can do, and business continuity is also something that it can do.
And that's interesting. The word business continuity years ago, that type of technologies you explained, we have basically a live running version of the production server. That would have been very expensive and only been something that enterprise level organizations would have had. But now that technology is available to everybody.
Yeah, if you were trying to achieve the same thing with an on-premise infrastructure, you would have to buy multiple servers.
Yeah.
So you'd have your physical server, and maybe in a different data center, you'd have another physical server to take over in case the first one went down. So that's a 100% increase on your costs straight away. Um, because Azure allows you to start up and shut down servers dynamically based on load or number of users or any other metric. You're not paying for those servers until you need them. So if you have 2 servers and suddenly you need to spin up 2 more servers for a couple of days, or you pay for them for a couple of days and then they get deleted and you're not paying for them anymore. So you've asked me quite a lot of questions about Azure now. So just one for you. How can we help organizations that are already using Azure and paying Microsoft directly? If they wanted to move across to us, how can we help them with payment terms and cost saving?
That's a good question. I'm glad you've asked me a question. I mean, I think organizations that are using Azure, one of the common problems that we see is actually not technically, but it's from the finance team. They're getting a screed of information from Microsoft. And as we discussed, that a lot of the time that doesn't make sense, or certainly doesn't make sense to a non-technical person. And in reality, sometimes it's challenging for us to kind of go, well, what does that mean? So, there's literally 100 lines for a typical Azure invoice. And having the ability to procure that same subscription through us, number one, they won't be paying the RRP price. So there's a cost saving straight away, as you've highlighted. And number two, this is what we do for a living. So, we're communicating what that invoice is in plain English and making it very clear about what they're using in Azure in English and putting the price against it. So there's clarity and transparency to that. And number three, sometimes there is those questions about, is this the right payment? And as we know, if you have that question to Microsoft, you're there for days and days and days, if not for weeks, trying to figure out or have that discussion rather. So again, we're removing that. If there is a question about the invoice, we can answer it all the time, and we've got the channel and the expertise because we do this every day.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. So for companies that are considering moving their Azure services to us, what can they expect in terms of technical or pricing assessments? What would happen first for them?
It's a good question. I feel that if organizations have been using Azure and they're enjoying the most part of that experience, typically the pain points that they have, as we've said, is around pricing, the surrounding, is it overly utilized or underutilized, and performance. And Azure, let's not fool ourselves, is a little bit complex, as we've talked about. So I would say to anybody that's finding those issues, to reach out to us and have that conversation about how we can help. So as we've highlighted, really, it's all about starting that relationship and helping that organization get the best out of Azure. Typically, that starts with that first conversation. And then number two, it starts with a free open assessment of just assessing, what are the top issues that organization has with Azure. It might be that things are slightly broken. It might be things are actually good, but they want to get it to a great place. And again, we then have an assessment model, a consultancy that will help them through that journey. So I would just urge somebody that's feeling some of these anxieties just to pick up the phone or reach out to us.
Yeah, for sure. So just yeah, as you say, head to the website or pick up the phone, or all of our contact methods are on the website. So reach out to us and we can help.
People can reach out to us directly. I'm David Lawrence at Grant McGregor, and you're Doug Davey at Grant McGregor.
Yep,
So
happy to help.
please just reach out to us directly and we'll have that conversation.